everybody, I hope you enjoyed my sample playthrough and also my tutorial video for the Pathfinder Adventure card game Skull and Shackles campaign. Now this is a standalone campaign set. You don't have to have the original Rise of the Runelord set to play the game, which is a definite plus, but I definitely do want to show this original game box to make a really strong point right here and right now, especially for people who have played Rise of the Runelords. And that point is that they have definitely raised the difficulty with this Skull and Shackles campaign. I'm going to go into a couple points to show you exactly how they've raised the difficulty, but first I want to make a couple points before I do so. I always found it interesting with the original Rise of the Runelords base set, you can always tell just exactly how far players got through the campaign by just listening to or reading the comments they made about the Rise of the Runelords set. And I want to comment on some of the comments people have made and give you some of my opinions on some of the things people have said about the Rise of the Runelords and how those concerns may have been taken care of in the Skull and Shackles campaign set. In the original Rise of the Runelords, in the very first campaign that you play through that comes with the base set before you bought any of the expansion decks, the original game did not have a lot of very difficult decisions to make. The monsters you were encountering were never really truly that difficult. It was pretty straightforward. You rolled a couple dice, played a couple cards, and it never felt like any of your decisions were very critical or very important or very difficult. But a lot of people don't realize is that you completed the Rise of the Runelord campaign, those decisions started becoming more important, they started becoming more difficult, and the game started becoming much more challenging. Now what they've done with the Skull and Shackles campaign is they've taken that difficulty level that you didn't get till pretty much the second adventure pack, and you have that straight out of the box immediately as soon as you start the very first adventure and the very first scenario for Skull and Shackles. And I'll show you what I mean by that. You look at some of the bosses that they added inside Skull and Shackles, and you look at some of the locations, and you see that they started doing things immediately in the very basic locations where they're forcing you to start discarding cards from your hand and starting to force you to start making some very difficult decisions. If you watch my sample gameplay video, you see in the fourth adventure, which is still the basic adventure, not even starting the very first adventure deck, that's the very first series of adventures, you see there are multiple locations that are forcing me to bury cards out of my hand and forcing me to lose cards and send cards to other locations, forcing me to make some very difficult decisions. And I definitely like that about Skull and Shackles. They raise the difficulty and they're forcing you to start making some really conscious decisions as you're developing your characters. And those difficult decisions don't just start with the locations. You're also going to have those difficult decisions as you're fighting some of the villains. The second villain that you're going to encounter in the very second scenario, just beginning this adventure path, is going to force you every time you encounter her, whether you win or lose, you're going to have to start discarding cards from your hand and sending them to other locations. Now what makes this difficult is, let's say you are forced to discard a very nice card from your hand, you need to send that to another location. Now you have the very difficult decision of when you encounter that location, and you eventually decide, or you eventually encounter the henchman protecting that location, do you defeat that henchman and close that location, permanently losing access to that item because that whole stack of location cards is going to be banished from the game? Or do you ignore closing location after you defeat the henchman and continue going through that location, trying to get that great card back that you had in your hand because it was a card that you really liked and you know it's going to be difficult to get it back again? These are some of the really cool decisions that they've added to the Skull and Shackles right out of the base set. Additionally, right out of the base set, they've also made it important to have a wide variety of skills for your adventuring party. It's no longer important just to have somebody who has a very high strength to start bashing all the bad guys, going to the location that has the most monsters, getting the monsters, bashing them down, and pretty much going from location to location and pretty much doing that as your strategy. It's not going to work, especially if you start encountering some of these villains who need more than just combat to defeat these villains, such as Nefty, who requires you to make a charisma or diplomacy check just to defeat her. And again, if you've failed to defeat her using charisma or diplomacy, since this is a combat role, you're still going to take points of damage. And she's a 13 check to defeat, making her quite difficult for a lot of characters, unless you happen to have a character who starts with a pretty decent diplomacy check. So you have characters like Lem who are very valuable assets to your party now, and this carries out through the rest of the campaign. A lot of different skills and a lot of different variety is needed to survive this campaign, because not only are there challenges with the villains, you're going to start encountering a lot of challenges with some of these Banes and some of these barrier locations that start doing some more complex things, adding to the complexity and the fun of the Skull and Shackles campaign. I am also liking the new heroes that they added into the Skull and Shackles campaign. They play a lot differently from the base set characters. You actually only get one character in this expansion, or this base set, who happens to be a bruiser character, and he's actually a battle priest. The rest of your characters are more different, adding special abilities that are giving you things such as the ability to examine different locations, use items such as alchemical items, meaning that your one-shot potions are going to have a lot more use, especially if you happen to have this character in your party. You're also going to have characters who use things such as guns, giving them much more range versatility. And of course, don't forget the returning heroes who are going to come into the new adventure path with slightly different abilities and different skills, adding to the variety. And don't forget, you can also use all the characters from the original adventure path, or you can even go and buy some of those class decks, and each one of the class decks has 4 additional characters, which are very much compatible with Skull and Shackles, and even compatible with the original Rise of the Rune Lords. Another thing I really like, and while it may just seem like it's theme deep at first, I also like the inclusion of the ships into the game. I like how they ramp up the difficulty, and they also give you one more thing that you need to be paying attention to, adding to the complexity of the game, which was one of the minor complaints people had about the original Rise of the Rune Lords. The complexity wasn't there in the earlier parts of the campaign. And again, right out of the gates with Skull and Shackle, you have that complexity there, especially with the ships. And again, I like how they work thematically, and I'm really hoping they can include this in future campaigns, even if they have to re-theme it, even if they have to pull Nodwick out and just say that he's your henchman carrying your goods. I like the fact that this is going to carry some various supplies for you. I like the fact that you're going to occasionally encounter other ships out on the open seas. And they also added a little bit of reality by saying that if you're not on your boat and you happen to encounter one of these cards that say counter a ship, they added it in the realism level, saying that if you encounter one of those cards, discard and ignore it, pretending it didn't happen. I'm glad they definitely did that, preventing you from having that realism jarring motion as you realize that something there isn't quite making sense. Overall, I think the Skull and Shackles Adventure Path is a fantastic addition to the Pathfinder Adventure card system. Now, to be perfectly fair, I am only in the first adventure. I have not gotten past the Wormwood Mutiny yet, so I don't know how good the rest of the campaign is. I do know that so far I'm having a heck of a lot of fun with it. My friends and I were having a heck of a lot of fun with it. We're playing currently a 4-player campaign. Sorry, a 4-hero campaign where each one of us is playing a various hero. We have the Combat Priest in our party, we have a Rogue in our party, we have the Witch in our party, and we also happen to have Maricel, the Rogue, and we have the Gunslinger. And so we're running a pretty good variety in our party. We haven't had any major problems where we felt like we were completely lacking the skills, but we do have a very good player variety, and we have gone into the Wormwood Mutiny, even though we haven't quite beat it yet. If you enjoy the original Rise of the Rune Lords, buying the Skull and Shackles is basically a no-brainer. You enjoy the original, you're going to like this even more due to the increased challenge and the increased difficulty and the increased variety, where it's not just simply going to be bashing somebody over the head and moving on to the next encounter. You actually have to use a lot of thought and a lot of planning throughout all these adventures to defeat these villains, to defeat these henchmen, and to defeat everything you're going to encounter, including these much more challenging barriers. If you've never played the Pathfinder Adventure card game and you're trying to decide between Rise of the Rune Lords and Skull and Shackles, I would personally say start with the Skull and Shackles. I like how it throws you into things immediately, and I love the difficulty level. I think it's perfectly balanced so far out of the box with lots of really good decisions. And I'd even go as far to say as if you played the original Rise of the Rune Lords and you thought it was a little bit too simplistic and a little bit too easy and you didn't get into the campaign, I would say give the game a try again with the Skull and Shackles campaign. Now, the game still does have a couple negatives, and these are all the negatives that were carried over from Rise of the Rune Lords. The first major negative for anybody is the fact that the game does rely on the dice, and sometimes dice are going to be fickle. Sometimes you'll get that 1 when you need a success, failing miserably. Sometimes you're going to get that 11, and you're going to get that major success and carry on through the encounter. It's the whims of fate, it's the fickleness of the dice, and it's part of the game. You have to be constantly judging and deciding, just pushing your luck against the odds and seeing if you got enough dice to make your successful check. The other thing that you're going to have to notice is that, yes, they still do not give you enough cards if you're OCD and you don't want to start marking up your character cards. You can definitely easily, and freely download all these character sheets from Paizo's website very easily. And I'll include a link in the show notes here for you if you want to download them. They're all free, and every one of these characters has been represented. If you don't want to mark up these cards, download these. They're the exact same things. You can just keep your character cards in the box, level up your characters using these character sheets, and you don't have to worry about damaging your pristine board game, or should I say card game. The basic bottom line with the Pathfinder Adventure card game is, to quote one of the players in my game group, they said, this is basically the closest you're ever going to get to playing a role-playing game without pulling out a DMG. They enjoy the game. We all enjoy the game. We have a heck of a lot of fun with it, and we can't wait to get through the entire campaign of the Skull and Shackles. Every time I do a review for a board game, I always like to take a few minutes and discuss player count and also just how family friendly a board, or in this case, a card game may be. Now, the basic Pathfinder Adventure card game does list as a game for 1 to 4 players, and there is an expansion deck called the Character Add-on deck, which will allow you to get 5 or 6 players. Now, I would definitely recommend buying the Character Add-on deck because it does add in a couple extra characters which play differently than the base 7 characters that come in the base set. This gives you 4 more characters. I'm not going to tell you to buy this to play this game with 5 or 6 players. Like the original game, I still don't think this game plays best with 5 or 6 players, and I think that's actually too many players for the game. The game difficulty ramps up too much for the simple fact that you have this timer based on blessing cards, and these blessing cards are your current countdown for the game. And you always have the exact same amount of blessing cards in the game. It doesn't matter if you have 1 hero going through the adventure or if you have 6 heroes going through the adventure. So what exactly does that mean? Well, if you have 30 blessing cards, that means there's going to be 30 turns for the game. If you have 1 hero, you have up to 30 turns to beat the game. If you're playing a 6-player game, guess what? Every player is only going to get 5 turns, and that's assuming that you can get through all 8 locations, which is a potential of up to 80 cards you have to go through in an effort to try to defeat the grand villain for the scenario you're trying to play through. Again, I still insist that this game is not meant to be played with 5 or 6 players. Yes, you can do it. Yes, you're going to notice that there's some extra downtime, and yes, you're going to be constantly fighting this blessing deck, and a lot of times you're going to lose simply because this blessing deck is going to time out versus because one of your heroes got defeated. I personally think the Pathfinder Adventure card game plays best as a 3-player or a 4-player game. I think that is the perfect player count for this game. That's actually how I have been playing it, is as a 4-player game with my play group. But don't get me wrong, this game, if you are a solo player, is still a fantastic game to play as a solo player. And as a solo player, you can play this game by selecting 1 hero and going through the adventure path. And I don't know how far you make it because, like I said when I was giving you my final thoughts on this game, they have made it so all the attributes in this game are extremely important. It's not like the original game where you can pretty much pick a bruiser type character and bash your way through, and you had a pretty good chance of succeeding. You're probably not going to get too far in this game by trying to bash your way through or trying to pick one strategy and trying to get through with 1 hero. So even if you decide to play the game as a solo game, I would definitely recommend you pick 2 heroes who complement each other very, very well. Or even I'd say go as far as to pick 3 heroes because, again, like I said, I think this game plays best with 3 or 4 heroes. And that's no different from any role-playing game, which this game is based on. It's basically a role-playing game and a card game. I never had a lot of fun playing role-playing games with 1 hero. The best time I always had is when we had 1 Dungeon Master or Game Master plus 3 heroes or 4 heroes to go on all the adventures. Nothing different here with the Pathfinder Adventure card game. The Pathfinder Adventure card game does recommend for ages 13 and up, and I think that's possibly partially due to complexity, partially due to playtime, and also just the fact that this is going to be an ongoing campaign where all your decisions are going to affect your heroes throughout the entire campaign. And it is quite possible to have a hero get very attached to that hero and through a bad series of events have that hero die. And for those reasons alone, I would definitely say this is a game that's probably best at the ages 10 and up. It's a great family game because it does play with up to 4 players, but I definitely would pick like the 9 at the extreme youngest. Most likely I'd probably say a 10-year-old to play this game due to a couple reasons. 1, this is a long campaign. 2, it's possible easy to lose a hero if that happens. And younger kids don't always accept losing their hero, especially when they become attached to that hero quite well. And finally, there also are some pretty tough decisions you have to make, and the game can be fairly complex. There's also a couple images that probably wouldn't be too good for the younger kids to see. Now, there's nothing overly gory or anything that you have to worry about hiding as a child walked by the table, but there are some images that are really good dark fantasy type of stuff, like the zombie, the Blood Moon Pirate, and also the Swamp Ghoul. Now these images, they're, like I said, they're not overly gory, but they're a little bit darker, so definitely not images you want the younger players seeing. Even if you happen to have a very bright 7-year-old, probably not images you want them seeing. So again, I definitely want to say Pathfinder Adventure card game, great game for families, especially with the camaraderie it's going to be as a cooperative game, but probably not a game you want to expose the younger kids to. Definitely will recommend ages 10 and up. The Pathfinder Adventure card game retails for $60, and for that $60, you're getting everything that you see in this box, including this fantastic insert, which is going to allow you to keep all your cards separated, which is very important because as you're playing the game, you're going to be constantly accessing this box, and all your cards are separated. You can have your adventuring party separate also, so you can keep playing the campaign game without having to reset your character cards at all times. And there's also room for all the expansion decks you can buy for the game, and you can place them all in this box, holding all the components for this box extremely nicely. The card stock for all the cards is extremely nice. These are good quality cards. You're not going to have to worry about these being very flimsy. They're going to last you a long time. Now, I'm not a huge sleever, so I don't sleeve a lot of my card games, but these cards have held up pretty darn well through a lot of plays. I've got about 15 plays out of this game so far, and I've not noticed any wear or tear on these cards at all. Now, of course, these are the cards that have the black edges, which are a little bit more prone to start showing wear and tear, but so far I haven't noticed any problems at all. Also, a lot of these cards have a lot of unique artwork. You don't see a lot of the artwork repeating itself except for the henchman cards and the duplicate cards, such as the blessing cards and some of the weapons, but most of the artwork for all these cards is unique, not repeated too much inside the box. Now, I don't play the Pathfinder role-playing game, so I don't know if any of these images were taken from there, but I do know that all the artwork I've seen for the game so far is really good, high quality, full color artwork, and it looks very nice. The rulebook that comes with the game is also very well written and covers all the rules in the game. You shouldn't have any problems learning to play the game just out of the rulebook. Although I have to give you a quick little pointer, the sample gameplay that's in the back of the book does have a couple errors. It's not a big deal because the rest of the rulebook does a great job teaching you how to play the game, showing you multiple examples and explaining a lot of the concepts for the game. So it's not a difficult game to understand how to play. And plus I have a video teaching how to play the game, not to give myself a self-plug here. And hopefully between the rulebook and my video, it should be pretty darn easy to understand how to play the game. And while I think you do get a very good value for your dollar for this game, you're going to get tons of replay value. You have lots of good artwork on cards. You have lots of good card stock here. And all this is only $60, which isn't too high for a card game. Yeah, you can find some card games a little bit cheaper with the same amount of cards, but you're not going to have the fact that you have this nice insert, these dice, and the amount of replay you're going to get out of this game. Having said that, though, I can definitely say you might want to throw a little bit more cash at this game, and I'm going to show you a couple of the things that I have done to improve the gameplay. The first thing you want to do is you're going to want to buy more dice. I recommend having at least 3 dice of every type, so you're going to have a total of at least 15 dice. That's 3 10-siders all the way down to 3 4-siders. It's going to make your life a heck of a lot easier, especially when you're trying to add up all the bonuses you're going to get from playing various cards. They're going to give you extra dice to play by playing all these different things. Having extra dice is just going to make your life a heck of a lot more easy. Also, I would suggest going over to the Reaper Miniatures website. They have a miniature to represent every one of the heroes in the Pathfinder game, and they're actually called the Pathfinder Miniatures, and they are 100% based on these exact heroes. So you can find a miniature to represent Jarrell. You can find a miniature to go ahead and represent Lenny. You can find a miniature to represent the Bard. They're all represented there, and if you have even if you have minimal painting skills, painting up these miniatures and using them to move to the various locations instead of using these cards is going to greatly improve the visual aspects of how much you're going to enjoy this game on a visual level. Also, on top of that, they have a very, very nice rubber mat that's put out by Ultra Pro, and this is a rubber mat which is going to allow you to lay out your board, and it makes things look much, much better. You can easily play the game without this mat by simply just laying out all your locations and placing the cards for them pretty darn easily, but it looks a lot better on this board. It's easier to set up, and not only that, you can get these character mats also where you can lay out your character card. You can have your character draw deck and your character discard pile. Now, while these aren't mandatory, they do look very, very nice on the table, and they're really not too terribly expensive. And if you're willing to enjoy this game, at least as much as I have, owning these things is not too much of an extra expense between the extra dice and the extra miniatures in this game mat to get a little bit of extra visual play out of this game. There is one minor negative, though. While these play mats and these character mats are not mandatory, you don't have to get them. You don't need to play the game with them. You are going to have to buy these extra adventure packs to complete the eventual complete campaign. If you don't buy these adventure packs, the game does come with the base adventure, which is going to give you 5 adventures right out of the box. The very first, the Wormwood Mutiny, plus you're going to get 5 other adventures from the basic campaign that are going to start before the Wormwood Mutiny, giving you a total of 10 adventures, which isn't too bad, but you're definitely going to want to spend the money and get these extra packs, which happen to be $20 a piece. And there's going to be a total of 6 of these, so that is going to add another $120 to the game over the life of the game. I personally think it's definitely worth it to get the entire campaign because it's awesome to watch your characters grow, and it's basically the whole idea behind this game. This is basically an RPG in a card game format, and it's no different than being an RPG player, buying a whole bunch of RPG books and buying a couple different modules for your heroes to go through. It's no different than that. And as a matter of fact, you don't even have to buy these adventure packs if you don't want to. You can actually create your own adventures if you want to just by using your cards, putting them together, and just writing up your own scenario, so it's not mandatory. But if you do want to go through the entire campaign, do expect to spend a little bit of extra money. The bottom line here is I think the $60 that you're going to pay for the base set is a decent price. It's not too high for me, at least not in my opinion, considering everything you get. I would just definitely say, I would suggest to go out there and get the miniatures. It's not going to cost you a lot of money to head over to Reaper's website. I'd also recommend buying a couple extra sets of dice. Again, it's not going to cost you a lot of money, just probably about $5 per dice tube if you just go to your local hobby store. Online, you can probably get them for $5. I think other hobby stores are about $10, so not too terrible at all. Not mandatory, it's just going to make your experience a little bit better. And I would definitely also recommend, at the bare minimum, getting this player mat to make setting up the game and organize the game a lot easier. While these character mats are very, very cool, they're not really mandatory. They're just more of a simple thing just to increase the eye candy. This mat, definitely not eye candy though. Definitely something I would suggest getting to improve the game. This has been another off-the-shelf board game review looking at the Pathfinder Adventure card game, the Skull and Shackles campaign, which is a continuation of the Rise of the Rune Lords. Not connected, not mandatory to own both of them, but if you do own both of them, you're going to get a heck of a lot of gameplay and one card game system. Thanks for watching.